The Square Ball Podcast.
Hello there, welcome to the show. Very special show for you here on the Square Ball feed on YouTube and on your podcast app as well. Dan, Michael and Moscow reacting to the appointment of Javi Gracia.
Well, we know he's in the East Stand. That doesn't mean he's necessarily signed. Just ask Dan James.
Yeah, give Dan James the job.
Yeah, we are assuming that's going to go through because it's now just after 1 o'clock on Tuesday.
It might have gone through by the time this is out. What are we going to do about the time space
Continuum.
Yeah.
Have we ripped it?
I don't know.
Just fire something into it.
Leeds have a new manager, don't they?
Yeah. How do you feel about that then after what's happened? It's probably like the last couple of weeks have made it more difficult than it perhaps needed to be. What's your reaction to the appointment of Gracia?
I mean, yesterday when he was first linked, I think I retweeted Romano with it, and I said, whatever, fine. Which is about where I am with it. It's like, he's a manager, fine. Just have him.
If we're going to be taken over by a women's magazine, I'd rather it was Grazia than Cosmo or Company or one of the others. I think it's a good choice. It's a bit more elegant, a bit more stylish, Grazia.
He's had a slightly strange career arc as Gracia, because if you look at his record at Watford, he also went on to manage at Valencia. But then he's been described, I've seen him described as a journeyman today. Mm-hmm. You would have thought, given that he did a pretty good job in the Premier League with Watford, albeit getting fired by Watford is it's not exactly rare, is it, in this industry. Went off to Valencia, did some bits there, did well at Malaga. That he's kind of never really cemented himself in prominent positions. You just wonder why that's not been the case, because he seems to have some reasonable chops about him.
I mean, the Watford thing, when I was listening to some Watford fans talk about him, he was well liked there and was the first manager under the Pozzos to actually get a new contract. Yes. Obviously, it didn't last long because they did sack him not long after giving him that contract, but they did see fit to give him a contract, which they don't normally do. They just, I mean, it seems to have gone off the rails a bit for Watford now, but for ages they just seem to constantly change managers, and it somehow sort of worked for them.
That's it. One Watford source has described him as the best manager they've had since Graham Taylor. And not only is that high praise, because Graham Taylor at Watford was a legend, but also they've had hundreds of managers since Graham Taylor. So for anybody to have actually stuck out in the madness that has been Watford under the Pozzo ownership, and to stick it to get a new contract, it's going to have something about them. And they'll say he's nice, like a nice man. They love him. They didn't want him sacked when he was sacked. Felt that he should have been given more time. And so if we want to be the new Watford, Hornets are pretty frightening animals. We all know this.
I mean, his spell at Valencia as well. I suppose you can reflect on that and say they are quite a shambles. Like he left there in 2021. They've had 2 permanent managers, 2 caretaker managers since. He left them in 14th. They're now in the relegation zone. Like it wasn't a good place to be. I know people will hear Valencia, and if you've not paid any attention, which truthfully I hadn't until we got this guy, but then I was like, oh God, they're really in shit, aren't they? Like they seem to be very badly run all of a sudden. Yeah. I think they're still in the Champions League semi-finals.
Well, we have had some. I mean, remember we bought Rodrigo from them because they needed money out of that, and we got Helder Costa went to them, didn't he?
Yes, for a loan.
Yeah, so there's been some, and you can sort of see I mean, I don't want to be mean to Helder Costa. He's always seemed like a very lovely fellow, but if you're going from the Champions League semi-final in 2001, which is obviously how we all remember Valencia from, and Pablo Hernandez, then Rodrigo, and then Helder Costa, it's kind of like it doesn't speak to a club progressing.
Is their new stadium still mothballed? Have they actually moved to it now? Because I remember seeing it was kind of under construction, like it was an Arsenal-style bowl, wasn't it? And I don't know if it's just still sat there
we'll have to ask.
In Valencia.
We'll ask Javi when he's in the job.
But yeah, it is an interesting career arc, because in Spain he had a good reputation, which landed him at Watford. And when you look at his Watford record, it's not bad, is it, to get mid-table in the Premier League, given all the things we know about how awful the Premier League is as a place.
And we've been talking up our cup run this year.
And what did he do?
Got them to an FA Cup final. I mean, he didn't go brilliantly.
You see, I look at this.
They lost 6-0. But
well, apart from that,
the first thing he did in the Premier League was keep them up.
Yeah.
So that's his first job, was to keep them up, and he did that. And I think because it hasn't been formally announced yet, we don't know what his length of contract's going to be, what the terms are, but certainly all we really need him to do is keep us up. Whether he then stays beyond that and becomes the next Rage Carter, then it's
the Spanish Rage Carter, as everyone's calling him.
Then that remains to be seen. But job one.
Was it Malaga where he went in and they were bottom of the table and he had them comfortably staying up with not that many games left in the season?
And they were in a financially bad spot as well at the time. Yeah. So he goes around. He loves a troubled club.
Because I've tried to keep an open mind about this because I know there was a lot of bad blood around what happened with Schroeder, and I think maybe the reaction to Schroeder was as much a verdict on Victor Orta as it was Schroeder himself, but he didn't come with a great reputation, did he? You could argue that because Gracia has seen the Premier League, he comes with a slightly better reputation. You know that he knows what this country's about.
Well, there's a completely different tone to it because we've got Watford fans saying he's a lovely fella and we never wanted him to go, whereas with Schroeder, we had Ajax fans from 2 months ago wanting to decapitate him
all the Ninja Turtles
and throw him in the river. So there's the two cultures who are coming with very different sort of deliveries of what they've recently done and reports from elsewhere. And you know, fans listen to fans, don't they? And the Ajax fans seem pretty certain that Schroeder was just no good whatsoever. Whereas I've not really heard anybody say anything bad about Garcia. So Garcia, I've done it, haven't I?
Yes, yes.
First one to go. Gracia. So it's apart from that, his name is difficult to get right.
I think that the thing is with Schroeder, it was that a lot of his record was as an assistant at places, and I know he's moved around a lot as Gracia, but he has been the manager at lots for all of that time. He's not been like dipping in and out of like, well, he goes back to being an assistant, then he's a manager for a bit, it doesn't work, then he goes back to being an assistant. He is the main man.
Schroeder was really easy to read as well because the manager before him was doing very well, and then he was terrible, and then the manager after him is doing really well. So there's like this big thing of like the most recent thing.
The Jesse
is
Marsh
awful.
sandwich.
And then and then you looked at the rest of his record.
Don't say that about him.
And you couldn't find in the rest of his record a thing that would make the recent occurrences okay. So there was nothing to counteract it. Whereas we don't have to do any of that with Gracia because everybody seems to think he was good, and mid-table finishes in the Premier League, as he was saying, are not to be sniffed at, and neither is a cup final.
And what I was going to say before was I've tried to keep an open mind about this rather than just be angry at the whole behind-the-scenes scenario. So I thought, what I'm going to do, and get this, I don't know if you'll ever want to give this a go for this podcast. I tried to do some research. Yeah. There's a good TIFO video laying out what his tactics were at Watford.
I watched the very same video.
What did you make of it? It's sort of a 4-4-2, which can turn into a 4-2-2-2. You got wide men that can tuck inside and act sort of as number 10s, which might suit someone like Little Brendan, for example, in that sort of role. It feels to me like it's so sensible. I kind of look at it and think, surely there's something wrong here. It's sensible to the point of being unexciting, but maybe that's just what we need, just somebody to organise this lot. And tactics that, what I was just going to say as a final thought, Moscow, is that they're not completely alien to what the players have been doing anyway under Marsh. It's a less aggressive press, I think, than perhaps Marsh was encouraging them to do. But then again, you know, everybody's press is probably less aggressive than Marsh was encouraging them to do. Different ways to unlock defences he seems to have, and the narrowness and the compactness and the 4-4-2 thing seems to be harder to break down anyway than perhaps we've seen with Leeds over the course of the season. So I looked at it and I thought, do you know what? This makes sense to me if you're going to divorce it from the table.
And his personality seems, from the reports, that he's quite understated, that he's not a publicity-hungry person, that he'll go about his business in a quiet way. So it was almost like a bit of a Skubala plus situation where it's somebody who's not going to be... who I'd never seen a press conference with the fella in my entire life that I can recall, or an interview with him. I must have done when he was on Match of the Day, I suppose, if we were in the Championship at the time. Maybe I was
you don't take much account of Watford managers, though, do you? Because you're like,
you just assume that somebody.
I'm not going to get attached to the guy.
But if he continues what we've kind of had with Skubala, of just come in, sitting down, here's the injury news. Are you happy with the last game? No. Are we going to win the next game? Hope so. All that, just kind of keep it ticking over, but bring whatever it was that Skubala didn't have for the last few games into, I would assume that there's... Well, I hope he gets the help he needs, because it's all part of the conversation of who is in there is it just a guy on his own and bringing in Gracia changes everything, or who is his staff? How much help does he get? What coaches are going to be installed around him to help him do what he needs to do for the rest of the season? And if he has, because that's part of the Dyche benefit at Everton, is that he has Stone and Woe next to him, and they've done it hundreds of times together, so it's just automatic, and that happens. Whereas Skubala, Armas, and it's who's the Gallardo from
a real odd trio, though, aren't they? They're completely pulled from different parts, aren't they? None of them were appointed at all. Well, Armas obviously very clearly appointed for Marsh, and then he's like, "Oh, you're now kind of assistant to this guy who was not ever meant to be manager,
who you've never met."
Yeah, you've probably never had any chance to sit down and discuss the way you think football should be played. So you may have completely different ideas, but just do what he tells you.
So bringing that in, and again, the tactics sound like they are not a million miles away from what we're doing, but also it's how far he goes in whichever direction, whether he can make the players adapt to what he wants to do, whether he can adapt what he wants to do to the players. It sounds within a reasonable distance, and then just win some bloody matches. And then all of this, like, it's really difficult previewing somebody who you'd not really thought about before. He appeared in the betting yesterday, and then the reports that he was going to Welland Road this morning, and then it's like, all right, now I've got to think about this guy. What I really want to think about is kind of look back on him taking us to the Champions League final with fondness.
Do you remember when I spoke to Angus Kinnear? I can't remember if you were on holiday at this point and whether it was the summer just gone or the one before that, when I asked if maybe you think that the club had been reactive. And he said, no, we're proactive. This new manager hunt feels like it's kind of dispelled that as an idea.
It's gone very badly, hasn't it? Let's face it. From the whole thing of appointing Marsh to hanging on to him for too long to getting rid of him without a replacement lined up, it's been a terrible, terrible look. And as has the thing is, if we'd have said at the start of it, we're getting rid of Marsh, it might take us a while to get in who we want, and then we got in who we wanted, you can almost accept that time. But the fact is that middle bit of time has been punctuated by tweets from the owner, very public and unsuccessful attempts to get managers we actually want, an attempt to appoint a manager, it seemed, who they could get, who then the fans didn't want, and there was enough of a storm around that he wasn't appointed. Because, I mean, he was at the game, and he was there to take the job, was Schroeder.
One event you have left out as well was the club confirming that all the targets that they were after were in work. So I said this before, you set parameters around both timescale and the type of appointment you want to make. You know, and the subtext of going after managers who are in work these are desirable managers because they're in work, as opposed to managers who are out of work. Yeah,
and so then we get to the point weeks down the line where we're appointing someone we could have appointed the day we got rid of Marsh. And that's the bad thing about it. If they had been, either you say we're confident we're going to get the person we want, but it might take a bit of time, you'll accept it, or you go, we got rid of him now, there's this guy available, we think he can do a better job, he's coming in straight away. Just as they did with Marsh, you know, was there a day or two between Bielsa leaving? And I think that the day or two that was left was more or less out of respect, because they didn't want it to be like them passing each other in the corridor.
Well, if we remember, Marsh was telling them not to sack Bielsa and put him in. So it was before Bielsa had been sacked.
I'm pretty sure Bielsa was fired on the Sunday and Marsh was in on the Monday.
Yeah, or at least announced, and then his press conference was very soon after. But you touched on the one thing that sums it up there is when they say the manager's going to be in work. Until they said that, I wouldn't have given a damn whether the new manager's in work or out of work or what he'd been doing. I was just like, okay, announce a new manager. So it's something that nobody needed to hear. And all it does is create problems for themselves and create expectations that they then struggle to fulfill. I think the proactive thing is interesting because every club tries to be proactive, and it's probably a good idea. You should have a plan, and there's nothing wrong inherently with deciding to have a project and build and work to one idea. It's what everybody should do, but then if you mess it up, it's a bad thing. So far, under Andrea Radrizzani's ownership, the plans have been, and the proactive situations haven't worked. So Thomas Christiansen and the strategy that summer didn't work. We were sacking him by February, and Jesse Marsh, the who we'd spent 18 months planning that, and again we've got rid of him by February. In between was the summer, and the story that they tell us it came down to Victor Orta having a screaming match with Andrea Rodrizzani in a restaurant that there was an F1 driver got frightened by, where he basically said, this isn't going to work. What we've been trying to do isn't going to work. We need to change this, rip it up. We go get Bielsa, we do something else. So that's reacting to the fact that the plan that they'd come in and spent a year trying to work hadn't worked. So they had to react to that. And they went and got Bielsa, and we had 3.5 years of brilliance. So the hope now is that because they have made a mess of being proactive with Marsh, they have made a mess of the search for his replacement, they've been forced into a situation where they have to react. Maybe reacting is the best thing that can happen to Leeds United, and when they sit down, or at least when they sit down and kind of go like, okay, let's really think carefully through what we're going to do, it comes out as just absolute nonsense. But when they just go like, name a manager, Gracia, it's like, yes, and then suddenly he turns up like some kind of absolute saint, because with him being presumably so far down the list, he must be, this is maybe the best thing we can say in his favour at the moment, he must be a really nice guy to go like, oh, you've spoken to all those, and now, but you want me? Sure, I don't have a problem with that. I like the sound of the job. You just lost to Everton in an absolute disaster, the worst performance of the season. Oh, yeah, I'll sort that out for you. So he must be okay with that, and that's immediately a good sign that somebody is coming in, whether it's it's clearly not by design. This is not, when they sacked Marsh, not what they thought was going to happen. And yet, I'm pretty confident that we can start building the statue now.
The thing about being proactive as well, as you were saying, obviously you need to make long-term plans, but the old Mike Tyson line about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. It feels like the Forest defeat, that was one punch in the face, and then getting turned down by all the managers we actually wanted was a further punch in the face. And then at that point you're like, fuck, just get someone.
Well, this is it. You need a plan good enough to avoid getting punched in the face. Whereas that's the part that the proactive side of things is never quite. The plan always just seems to be like, how about we just get punched? Is that the plan? Okay, let's go, because I've been good at that.
Ow, that hurt.
Yeah. Why do we keep going back to that plan?
The Guardian, by the way, was suggesting it. I've not seen. There's obviously not been the official announcement yet, but the Guardian was suggesting this is a contract until the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean that even also makes me think that Gracia is the nicest person in the world if he's just like willing to just come in and clear up this mess.
Oh, they might have said, you can have £2 million if you keep us up. In which case you go, yeah. Who knows though how that's structured?
And then maybe that's something about him not having again, because I don't know a lot about him. Welcome to our informative podcast, everyone. But if he's kind of not had a longer term job for a while, like not one that you could really sort of put his stamp on, maybe he's happy just doing those jobs, a bit of a journeyman who will go and tidy things up for a lot of money. And because there is, who was it I was listening to talking about that? Because there's different kinds of challenges, isn't there? There's the challenge of you build a football club and you try to create a dynasty and the team is in your image and all that kind of stuff. And then there are other coaches who just like the challenge of just like, wow, that place seems like there's a lot of trouble there. I'll go and see if I can sort it all out. And hopefully we've got somebody who is good at that. And if he's then happy to hand over to one of the people who we actually wanted and who sounded pretty good, then that would be, it's all going to be fine, isn't it? It's
not surprising in some ways when you look at his record that he has taken it, because he's clearly been willing to travel for work, hasn't he? You know, he's been to Greece, and he was in Qatar most recently. He's from Spain, but he's managed several places there. He's been in Russia, been at Watford. He'll go anywhere. And now West Yorkshire.
Very exotic, West Yorkshire.
It's nicer than Watford, so he's got that. That
was one thing, actually, when I was watching a video of him with Guillaume Balaguer when he was at Watford. It was kind of talking him up, I think not long before he got sacked, to be honest. It was quite a nice, but it was quite a nice video, and they were asking him what he would change about England. He said the weather. And he liked, you said he misses the ham in Spain as well. But
Jamon.
The jamon.
Mm-hmm.
The jamon, yes.
That's ham in Spanish, by the way.
You're joking.
No. It is.
can go
Just,
to,
I just wanted to make sure everybody understood.
I'm sure he can get some nice ham in Leeds.
I was going to
can't
say,
he?
I'm sure there'll be. You can get Parma ham
Well,
in there.
there's friends of ham down by the station,
There is.
which I'm sure do a good
Next door to
serrano.
Lanes.
They're not friends of ham either. It's full of dead pigs. I heard. Quite the opposite.
The friends of ham, it's pigs they can't stand. Anyway, support your local indie businesses, everybody.
It's tickled. Yeah. Dear me. So overall thoughts on it then. I'm just relieved there is a plan, as you're saying, at Moscow. Whether they arrived at it by accident or by design, whether it turns out to be the real plan or not, the next 15 games are going to tell us, aren't they?
I think we were saying last week that giving Skubala, or at least announcing that Skubala was going to do Everton, was a good move because it just meant we knew what was going on. And it took the pressure out of the back end of last week. And then it all goes wrong on Saturday afternoon. And now this seems like the next best thing of how they can try to get out of the corners that they've backed themselves into is, all right, well, we can't do that again. So let's just have somebody. And I don't know, hopefully we're not here next Tuesday going like, well, how do we get this guy out?
I feel like it's been a very bad period for the board, though. They've come out of this looking amateurish, quite spectacularly so.
But it's not done yet, is it? This season there is there's still
plenty of
distance left
games.
to run. It's salvageable.
We've also not even appointed this guy yet. He could be marching out of there soon. Has one meeting with Victor Orta. He's like, sod this. I thought I could help you guys, but this is impossible.
Fighting each other, pulling lumps out of each other's hair. What do you think it'll do to the atmosphere at Ellen Road on Saturday? I think it should improve it substantially. I think it's still not going to be far off turning, and I think the board should probably be prepared for that. That if things go badly on Saturday, they're going to be right in the firing line. However, it's just giving it a little bit of a reset, I think, and I think the crowd will start off very, very supportive.
Yeah, I think it'll diffuse things for at least 10 minutes, depending on how the game goes. But it means pre-game, there will be support for him, I think. And it's not much as the same as it was with Skubala. He's going to get at least a handful of games before anyone begins to criticise him, because everyone can be like, well, it was shit when you arrived. You've not had any time.
It only needs to be moderately better. That's the thing. If you can just turn some of these draws and defeats into more points, then it'll be okay.
Look how bad Everton were.
Yeah.
And they managed to beat us by just being a bit better than us, who were abysmal. If we can be quite bad for the rest of the season, that's what I'm hoping for. That's my high hopes.
We only need to be the fourth worst team now, and it's sad that it's come down to this, but here we are.
And he might do it. I mean, all we can do is support him, can't we? It's fair to say no one, including his employers, had him at the top of their list of people they wanted. And in some ways, the fan opinion is less of a difficult thing to deal with than the board opinion, because he has to work with those people, and they'd be like, "Well, we didn't want you, but Rafa Benitez didn't fancy it." He was a bit expensive.
Victor, just take that list off your desk. Just put it in the bin, quick. Shred it.
When the news broke of him yesterday, Romano said there was another name on the shortlist, didn't he? So whether or not who was top of it at that point, you don't know.
Yeah.
The Benitez stuff. It seemed to mainly be Twitter talk, didn't it? Benitez,
to be fair, that could have just been if somebody's perhaps passing information to Romano. Can't think who that might be.
Someone who's got the phone in their hand more than they should.
Maybe. Who knows, Michael? That's one for the listener/viewer to decide on their own. But what I would say is, if that's what Romano's been told and that's what he's reporting, then fine. Maybe it's just to add a little bit of mystery to the whole thing. You don't know, make the club look like they've got irons in the fire and all that, when really it was going to be Gracia all the time.
You do wonder if they saw that when it went public with Schroeder, that went badly. When he was the only name, so they went, we'll say
Have a backup.
We'll say it's Gracia plus another we're considering, and then they went put the name out. And everyone was like, it seems to be all right. People aren't furious about it.
Yeah.
Thank God we don't have to pretend there was someone else.
Do you want to come for a drink with me? I mean, it's either you or the other girl.
But yeah, we've. I suppose it probably isn't his dream job either, is it?
The thing
it's the truth of it.
The thing with Gracia, from a fan's point of view, is I think everybody is ready, willing and hopeful that it goes really well. And it's same as it was with Skubala, and it's very different to how I think people currently feel about the board. Whereas I think there's probably an element of it's difficult to reconcile it, but you almost hope it doesn't go well so that you can scream at them and sort of have the the result that they probably deserve for the last season and the last year should end in, a final. It's a little bit like the thing that everybody is angry about. One of the many things people are angry about with Victor Orta was when he was on the pitch against Brentford at the end last year, pointing at Jesse Marsh, saying, "Look, he kept us up. He kept us up." I don't think that could be repeated if Gracia keeps us up, and I think that's kind of the thing now. Is that
and nor should it be.
We're all hoping that it goes really well, and we're all pretty much. Well, I'm not trying to speak for other people. I think a lot of people are pretty decided that if it does go well, even that you won't turn around to the board and go, "Yeah, great job of 2023."
I was going to say,
guys.
this is the thing with like the fingers in the ears and all that kind of stuff. And you saw that video clip of him outside the stand saying, without me, 16, 17 years.
Yeah, that's Brentford last year.
Where's the humility in the situation?
I mean, we spoke about that one at the time, and I don't mind. Like, people were shouting at him outside the Brentford stadium, and so he was shouting back. And it's not ideal. Nobody wants that with your director of football, but it's two-way arguments.
Just be better at your job then.
Yeah, that's the solution. But then the thing so the situation we're in now is that Gracia basically, if he messes it up, if we don't get out of this, it's not going to be his fault unless he sets us up in some absolutely ridiculous, like if it's Christopher Claassen playing up front next with partnering Diogo Monteiro is our front two, then we'd probably say this guy has some blame. But it's bigger than him, and he's just the guy that we hope sorts it out, similar to Skubala. But yes, so this is a very long way of saying, even if this season now ends successful, I don't think anybody is going to be patting Orta and Co on the back and saying you really handled all this brilliantly. Good job, lads. Great season.
I think you may be underestimating Victor Orta there for his ability to
make it about himself.
To make it about his occasional lack of self-awareness and modesty has been his undoing at several points, I think. I mean, the clip that has been constantly retweeted in recent weeks of him after the Bournemouth win.
Sack the board.
Doing all that.
In the West Stand.
And we're now the only team, was it Johnny,
in the top 6
Johnny
tiers?
Cooper stats said, the top 6 tiers to have not won a game since then. So,
well, people,
stupid moments.
Maybe he looked, because he was wandering around it, and Goodison, and he didn't have the, I'm not really into analysing the photo of the finger because he got no idea what was going on in that situation. It's a split-second photo, but from seeing him about, he didn't look particularly feisty. He looked like somebody who quite properly had the weight of the situation upon him, which is exactly where it should be.
Yep.
And if he just sorts it out in that respect, so that Gracia is the person who does the job, and then we don't have any kind of celebration of that, and we just quietly just go about whatever we're going to do next.
Get him on the Mogadon until the end of the season.
Yeah, that's it. Get Radrizzani off his phone. Get Orta to just keep it, calm it down.
Does Radrizzani even go anymore? I don't know. I haven't seen him for a couple of weeks.
Is he?
Is all well there? Is he not too busy having fun with his new toy at DAZN?
There was some mention that he's on holiday.
Oh, okay.
But I think he's posting on some of his social media that he might be in Spain. I don't know.
Hopefully he's turned off his roaming. And final thought, Javi Gracia, doesn't he look like Mike D from the Beastie Boys? I mean, terrifyingly so. No sleep till beasting and all that, yeah?
I've seen a mock-up of that already.
Yeah, well, we had one tweeted at us, which I've retweeted from the Square Ball account. So let's see how it all goes, shall we? But all the best to the fella.
He seems, on paper, more qualified than both Jesse Marsh and Skubala. He's done more stuff in the game, hasn't he? So, best of luck to him.
And we'll wrap it up there then. Look out for more stuff in your feeds on YouTube and your podcast app this week.
The weekly show will be discussing how it turned out this deal didn't go through, and how Skubala is actually the answer.
When he headbutted Phil Hay at his opening press conference, how badly that's gone.
We'll speak to you later on.
The Square Ball Podcast.